You get something straight. Nobody made me. Nobody owns me. And nobody sure as hell tells me what.
The Undertaker has never shied away from standing up to Vince McMahon, and now he is openly accusing him of being responsible for Hulk Hogan's death after decades of relentless exploitation.
I've had 17 surgeries in the last 10 years.
Oh my God. What's not original here?
The knees are fake. The hips are fake. The back's full of metal.
And Hulk wasn't the only name he called out. The Undertaker confronted Vince McMahon about the long trail of fallen wrestlers left behind in his wake. Let me break it down. The wrestling world was shaken on July 24th, 2025, when Hulk Hogan died at the age of 71 from a heart attack. But behind the tributes and public mourning lies a darker truth that insiders had whispered about for decades. According to The Undertaker, what killed Hogan wasn't just cardiac arrest, it was the slow, systematic destruction of bodies and minds, driven by a culture of brutality, steroid abuse, and psychological warfare, all overseen by one man, Vincent Kennedy McMahon. The signs had always been there, hidden in plain sight beneath the bright lights and pyrotechnics. For years, WWE's culture under McMahon has faced criticism for putting spectacle ahead of performer health. And for over 4 decades, he built an empire not just on entertainment, but on the broken bodies and shattered minds of the very wrestlers who made him billions.
I didn't get the memo about the fake wrestling.
I was gonna say.
Yeah, I missed that part. You know, it's predetermined. We know who's going to win or lose, but what people don't understand is it's very physical. And back in the day, in the 70s, when I first started, I've still got...
Hogan himself admitted the brutal physical reality of what McMahon's system demanded. The man who rose to become wrestling's biggest icon had been breaking down his body from the very beginning, conditioned to accept pain and injury not as warnings of abuse, but as normal parts of the business.
I reconstructed a couple times from getting hit in the face, nose broken 13 times. All these teeth, these fake teeth, have been knocked out 6 times. So it's been...
This was not just the normal wear and tear of athletic competition. It was systematic physical destruction that McMahon's system both normalized and celebrated. Hogan was conditioned to see his body as expendable, a tool to be broken and rebuilt in service of McMahon's entertainment empire. Looking at the wider health crisis that plagued WWE under his leadership, a horrifying pattern comes into focus. Steroid use was rampant throughout the 1980s and 1990s, contributing to long-term issues like heart disease and mental health struggles. This wasn't simply about enhancing performance, it was about creating an environment where wrestlers felt forced to trade their long-term health for short-term success. The numbers alone are chilling. A 2014 study revealed that professional wrestlers were 15 times more likely to die from cardiovascular causes and 122 times more likely to die from drug overdoses compared to the general population. These aren't just statistics, they represent lives cut short by a system that treated performers as disposable commodities instead of human beings.
I've had 17 surgeries in the last 10 years.
Oh my God. What's not original here?
The knees are fake. The hips are fake. The back's full of metal.
Hogan's own body stood as living proof of McMahon's systematic destruction. 17 surgeries in just 10 years made it clear this wasn't simply the result of aging. It was the accumulated damage from decades of abuse that McMahon's system had normalized. Each surgery was another attempt to patch together what the wrestling machine had already broken. McMahon's empire was ultimately built on what can only be described as a culture of fear and physical destruction.
WWE, quote, is a kingdom ruled by fear. It is the motivating factor everywhere.
This fear wasn't only psychological, it was the very real terror that speaking out about health problems, steroid abuse, or unsafe working conditions could mean the instant end of a wrestler's career.
When you get older, you kind of crunch up a little bit anyway. All those things added up, you know, so it's very, very physical.
There are some wrestlers, and maybe a lot of wrestlers, who deal with this with alcohol and...
Hogan recognized that the problem was systematic. The pain wasn't just his own, it was generational, affecting entire groups of wrestlers who had all been pushed through McMahon's machine. The widespread alcohol and drug abuse wasn't simply a matter of personal weakness, it was a predictable response to years of relentless physical destruction.
How common is that?
It's very common. When I was wrestling full-time...
Hogan recognized that the problem was systematic. The pain wasn't just his own, it was generational, affecting entire groups of wrestlers who had all been pushed through McMahon's machine. The widespread alcohol and drug abuse wasn't simply a matter of personal weakness, it was a predictable response to years of relentless physical destruction.
There was a very heavy layer of fear and tension, and that was directly from Vince. And the culture that he created obviously created a lot of problems. The writers all agreed that the culture of fear spread throughout the company from the writers' room to the road, all the way to the promotion's headquarters, where they all witnessed varying...
This culture didn't just affect mid-card wrestlers or backstage staff, it reached all the way to the top. creating an environment where even the biggest stars like Hogan lived in constant anxiety about their standing and future. The psychological strain of dealing with McMahon's unpredictable demands left scars that extended far beyond the wrestling ring.
You ever do it?
Yes. Yes.
There was a time you said no.
Yeah, one time.
I trained 20 years, 2 hours a day to look like I do. But the things that I am not is I'm not a steroid abuser.
Even Hogan's admission of steroid use was shaped by the psychological conditioning of McMahon's system. The denial, the excuses, the efforts to downplay the extent of the abuse, all of it revealed just how deeply McMahon's culture had taken hold of his performer's mind.
And actually, when I said no, I wasn't on steroids at the time, so I was playing with words.
Knowing what you've gone through, if you could make a decision again on whether to go into wrestling, having become the Bionic Man, would you do it again?
They're about to go after the eye. Oh no. F5 plants Hogan.
The most chilling part of Hogan's testimony is his continued loyalty to the very system that destroyed him, even after 17 surgeries, even after admitting to years of steroid abuse, even after describing himself as the Bionic Man, he still said he would do it all again. That loyalty stands as the ultimate proof of how powerful McMahon's psychological conditioning had become. His victims remained devoted to the system even as it was killing them.
Everybody was getting yelled at all the time in the room, one former writer said. It was more saying stuff, I'm editing myself, that was humiliating or mean, couched as a joke. But it's a nasty joke. If you're being targeted in a room, nobody stands up for you. But that's because if they do,
This culture of silence carried deadly consequences for wrestlers like Hogan. When performers faced injuries, addiction, or serious health problems, they were conditioned to endure quietly rather than risk McMahon's wrath. The toll was enormous, with mounting evidence of lasting physical and mental damage, from concussions to chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, with tragic cases like Chris Benoit serving as grim reminders of these dangers. To truly understand how Vince McMahon's system destroyed Hulk Hogan, we must look into the pharmaceutical nightmare that defined professional wrestling during his reign. This wasn't simply about boosting performance. It was the systematic poisoning of an entire generation of wrestlers, with Hogan standing as both the poster child for success and the ultimate victim of a machine built to consume human bodies for profit.
It's hard to believe when you see somebody this big that steroids is not kind of the common drug in the ring.
The interviewer's observation cut to the core of McMahon's pharmaceutical empire. Hogan's massive physique was never natural. It was the result of systematic chemical enhancement that McMahon's system not only allowed, but demanded. The very size that made Hogan a global icon was the same force that was slowly killing him.
You ever do it?
Yes. Yes.
There was a time you said no.
Yeah, one time.
I trained 20 years, 2 hours a day to look like I do. But the things that I am not is I'm not a steroid abuser.
Hogan's initial denial, even as he admitted to steroid use, revealed the deep psychological conditioning McMahon's system had instilled. The supposed difference between use and abuse was meaningless in a culture where continuous chemical enhancement was required to maintain status and relevance. His death from acute myocardial infarction, with contributing factors, including chronic lymphocytic leukemia, marked the tragic final chapter of a story that began decades earlier, when McMahon turned professional wrestling into a pharmaceutical experiment, using human beings as test subjects. The cardiac arrest that ended Hogan's life wasn't random. It was the predictable result of years of systematic steroid abuse that McMahon not only tolerated but actively encouraged. The scale of McMahon's pharmaceutical empire becomes undeniable when looking at the institutional support behind steroid distribution. The 1994 steroid trial revealed that Dr. George Zahorian III, a ringside physician, had supplied steroids directly to WWE and even to McMahon's office, proving this wasn't simply a matter of wrestlers making individual choices. This was an institutionalized system of drug distribution operating under McMahon's direct supervision, with Hogan standing as both one of its greatest beneficiaries and one of its ultimate victims. The true scope of McMahon's pharmaceutical empire becomes clear when looking at the systematic health consequences that followed his rise to power. Steroid use has long been tied to severe cardiovascular problems, including enlarged hearts, impaired pumping ability, arrhythmias, and premature cardiac arrest. Hogan's death fits this profile with chilling precision. The enlarged heart, the cardiovascular complications, and the sudden cardiac failure that marked the final stage of chronic steroid abuse.
6'7" before the Rocky movie.
How tall are you now?
I'm 6'4.5".
How could you lose almost 3 inches?
Fast forward 35 years later, dropping a leg drop every night on my spine, 2 knee replacements, 2 hip replacements.
The physical collapse of Hogan's body tells the full story of McMahon's systematic destruction. He lost 3 inches of height from spinal compression, endured multiple joint replacements, and underwent 9 back surgeries. This wasn't simply the normal wear and tear of competition. It was the systematic breakdown of a human skeleton under the combined assault of steroid-induced tissue damage and relentless physical trauma. The death toll for McMahon's pharmaceutical machine reads like a casualty list from chemical warfare. The Ultimate Warrior died of heart failure at 54 in 2014. Roddy Piper suffered cardiac arrest at 61 in 2015. And Randy Savage passed away at 58 with an enlarged heart and 90% artery blockage in 2011. Each name is not just a statistic, but a human life cut short, another body systematically destroyed by the same pharmaceutical cocktail that ultimately claimed Hulk Hogan.
Knees, I've had 3 or 4 surgeries on my knees, each knee before I had them replaced.
What's not original here?
The knees are fake.
The systematic replacement of Hogan's joints showed just how completely McMahon's system had destroyed his body. These weren't isolated injuries from single events, they were the predictable outcome of decades of steroid-induced tissue breakdown combined with the repetitive trauma demanded by McMahon's entertainment machine. But the pharmaceutical nightmare went far beyond steroids. Dependence on painkillers, often mixed with alcohol, fueled countless overdoses and deaths. Hogan himself admitted to being caught in this cycle, relying on dozens of pills washed down with alcohol just to get through the pain. This wasn't about recovery, it was about survival, in an environment that broke down human bodies and then offered more drugs as the only solution. The systematic nature of McMahon's pharmaceutical empire became even clearer when looking at how WWE handled health concerns. As independent contractors, wrestlers were denied health insurance, pensions, and long-term medical care, leaving them with deteriorating joints, chronic back problems, and surgeries that piled up as the years went on. This was not just corporate negligence, it was a deliberate strategy to avoid responsibility for the pharmaceutical nightmare WWE had created while forcing the costs onto the performers themselves. The medical evidence surrounding Hogan's death tells the full story of McMahon's pharmaceutical destruction. Records confirmed he died from acute myocardial infarction, with contributing factors including a history of atrial fibrillation and chronic lymphocytic leukemia. Each of these conditions has direct ties to long-term steroid abuse, an enlarged heart, struggling to pump blood, an irregular heartbeat caused by damaged cardiac tissue, and a weakened immune system that allowed cancer to take hold. What makes this tragedy even harder to accept is how preventable it could have been if McMahon had prioritized performer health over pharmaceutical enhancement. The cardiovascular damage that killed Hogan was both predictable and preventable had the focus been on human lives instead of profits. The death of Hulk Hogan on July the 24th, 2025, represents far more than the loss of a wrestling icon. It stands as the ultimate indictment of Vince McMahon's systematic destruction of human beings in the name of entertainment. Looking at Hogan's final years through his own words and experiences, we see not just one man's decline, but the inevitable outcome of a system designed to consume its stars completely, body and soul.
I got to a point where everything kind of hit me at the same time. The divorce, my whole world falling apart. Both of the kids were with Linda. And
Hogan's admission of suicidal thoughts was not simply about personal struggles, it reflected the systematic psychological breakdown that McMahon's system inflicted on even its biggest stars. The man who had been conditioned for decades to believe he was invincible eventually came to see himself as broken, expendable, and consumed by the very machine that had created him.
I was to the point where I wanted to kill myself. I sat in my bathroom by myself when my ex-wife was gone and the kids were gone, and I was completely broken and destroyed, and I said, what's the easiest way out of this? I mean, I was lost.
The psychological destruction that McMahon's system inflicted on Hogan was just as devastating as the physical toll. The culture of fear, the relentless pressure to uphold an impossible standard of perfection, and the systematic dehumanization all combined to reduce the world's most famous wrestler to a broken man, left alone to contemplate suicide in his own bathroom.
I made friends with Layla Ali, and during the day, I had several phone calls. I picked it up and said, hey, we're just checking on.
The fact that a single phone call from Layla Ali may have saved Hogan's life shows just how completely McMahon's system had isolated him. A man once surrounded by millions of fans, countless colleagues, and industry insiders was ultimately left alone at the moment he needed human connection most, a direct consequence of the competitive, fear-driven culture that McMahon had built.
And just her saying hello to me and saying, yeah, we're just checking on you, make sure everything's okay. That pretty much woke me up. And in that moment, I said, you know what? There are a lot of good people out there.
So Layla Ali.
The tragic irony is that it took someone from outside McMahon's wrestling system to show the human compassion that may have prevented Hogan's suicide. The same industry that made billions from his performances had built a culture where genuine concern was so rare that a single phone call became life-saving. The systematic nature of McMahon's destruction becomes undeniable when looking at the accumulated damage Hogan's body endured in his later years. Multiple neck and back surgeries stood as painful reminders of the decades of abuse demanded by McMahon's entertainment machine. And through it all, the culture of fear that defined McMahon's empire played a crucial role in keeping Hogan from seeking the help he so desperately needed.
The mood of Vince McMahon. He always said he gauged whether Vince was in a good mood or a bad mood. He looked at the writers, or he stuck his head in the writers' room, and if they were happy, Vince was in a good mood. If they were sad or pensive or anxious, he knew that Vince McMahon was on a ramp.
Hogan's final WWE appearance on January 6, 2025, where he was met with heavy boos from the Los Angeles crowd, marked the ultimate humiliation of a man who had given everything to McMahon's empire, only to be cast aside once he was no longer profitable. Even The Undertaker couldn't hide his lack of sympathy for Hogan's final downfall.
Pop was something.
It was something.
It was a pop.
It was. That was an ego pop.
Lord have mercy. Wonder what you think he went back to the dress. Well, you were there.
I was there.
What happened? What happened backstage after he came back?
No, when I saw him, he was not.
The callousness wasn't personal, it was institutional, a reflection of how McMahon's system had conditioned even its most successful stars to see one another as rivals instead of human beings worthy of compassion. The Undertaker's lack of sympathy for Hogan's humiliation stands as the ultimate proof of McMahon's psychological conditioning at work.
I didn't see him. I wasn't backstage when he came.
Did you feel like giving him a hug afterwards?
No.
Here's Taker being a company man right
Right. Did you feel bad for him?
The Undertaker's observation that everybody realizes Hogan wasn't the guy he was portrayed to be exposes how McMahon's system built false mythologies around its performers while systematically destroying the real people behind the characters. The true Hogan had been consumed by the machine, leaving only a broken shell playing the role of a hero he had never truly been allowed to become. The medical evidence surrounding his death offers the final proof of McMahon's systematic destruction. Hogan's passing, following recent surgeries and years of health struggles, was not the result of natural aging. It was the outcome of a body systematically broken down by decades of steroid abuse, repeated surgeries, and the crushing physical and mental toll of life in McMahon's empire. Perhaps the most tragic part of Hogan's story is his continued loyalty to the very system that destroyed him. Even after 17 surgeries, even after calling himself the Bionic Man, even after admitting to steroid abuse and suicidal thoughts, he still remained psychologically tied to McMahon's machine. That is the ultimate proof of McMahon's conditioning, creating victims, who stayed grateful for their own destruction. And the ultimate tragedy of Hulk Hogan's death is that it was entirely preventable. If McMahon had chosen to prioritize performer health over profits, if the culture of fear had been replaced with genuine care, if the pharmaceutical abuse had been stopped before it became institutionalized, Hulk Hogan might still be alive today. Instead, we are left with the harsh truth that Vince McMahon's empire ultimately consumed its greatest creation, using Hogan until nothing was left and discarding him when he was no longer profitable. The heart attack that ended Hogan's life on July 24, 2025, was only the final symptom of a disease that had been eating away at him for decades. The disease of being human in an inhuman system created by Vince McMahon. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, click one of the boxes on your screen to see more content like this.